When my daughter told me the trust fund conversation could wait until after her honeymoon, I nodded, kissed her cheek, and drove home. 3 days later, I had 19 missed calls. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 64 years old, a retired structural engineer, 31 years with the same firm, the last 12 of them as head of project integrity for commercial builds across the Midwest. My entire career was spent finding the hairline crack before it became the collapse. Load calculations, stress tolerances, the quiet art of noticing what everyone else assumed was solid. I retired 18 months ago with a pension, a paid-off house in Dayton, Ohio, and a daughter I would have handed the sky to if she'd asked for it the right way. I want to tell you what happened when she stopped asking and started taking instead. Before I get into it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if you've ever poured everything into a child only to watch them treat your generosity like it was owed to them, hit that like button, because I think you'll understand exactly where this story is headed. My wife Carol passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late, gone in 11 months. After she died, the house got quiet in a way I never adjusted to. My daughter Renee was 29 then, married 2 years to a man named Trevor Aldrich, and in the vacuum Carol left behind, I did what I think a lot of grieving fathers do. I poured myself into being useful to my kid. Not because Renee asked me to, because I needed somewhere to put 31 years of competence that no longer had a project attached to it. Renee and Trevor live 40 minutes away in a newer development outside Columbus, a neighborhood of stone-front colonials with 3-car garages, the kind of subdivision built for people who wanted their success visible from the street. Trevor sold commercial insurance. Good at it, by all appearances, but insurance commissions are a feast or famine business, and I understood that better than most, because I'd spent a decade reviewing vendor contracts for companies exactly like his. 2 years ago, Renee called me crying. Not about money at first, about a nursery. She was pregnant with my first grandchild, and she and Trevor wanted to finish the basement into a proper suite before the baby came, but their contractor bid had come in $11,000 over what they'd budgeted, and the bank wouldn't extend their home equity line any further that year. I didn't hesitate. I wired the $11,000 the next morning, told her it was a baby gift, not a loan. Don't insult me by trying to pay it back. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't the end of it. It was the beginning of a pattern I was too grief-soft and too proud of my own daughter to see clearly. Over the following 18 months, the requests kept arriving, always wrapped in some version of temporary. A temporary cash flow gap while Trevor's Q3 commissions cleared. A temporary need to cover the property tax bill because the mortgage escrow had been miscalculated. A temporary shortfall on my granddaughter Maya's preschool tuition deposit. Each one on its own sounded reasonable. Each one I paid without asking many questions, because I had the money, because Carol and I had lived beneath our means our entire marriage, specifically so that our daughter would never have to struggle the way we once had, and because some quiet, aching part of me believed that being needed by Renee was the closest thing I had left to still being needed by Carol. By the time I actually sat down and added the transfers up on a rainy Tuesday morning 8 months ago, the number stopped me cold. $61,400 across 19 months. Not $1 of it repaid. I didn't confront her about it. I told myself I was being a father, not an accountant. I told myself the number didn't matter because it wasn't really about the money. It was about family taking care of family. I want you to remember that I believe that completely, right up until the week before my granddaughter's 3rd birthday, when everything I'd built my identity on for 40 years, the ability to spot a structural failure before it became visible, finally turned inward on my own life. The birthday party was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in early June at a party venue near their neighborhood with an inflatable bounce house and a hired face painter, the kind of production that cost more than my own wedding reception did in 1987. I'd bought Maya a wooden dollhouse I built myself in my garage over 6 weekends. Hand-sanded, hand-painted, hinges I sourced specifically so the little doors wouldn't warp. I was proud of that dollhouse in a way I hadn't been proud of anything since I retired. I drove up Friday evening instead of Saturday morning because Renee had mentioned she wanted help setting up chairs before the caterer arrived, and I figured I'd stay in their guest room overnight rather than make the drive twice in one weekend. I pulled into their driveway around 6:30. The garage door was open. Trevor was loading folding tables into the back of a rental van, and through the open front door I could hear voices, more voices than I expected for a setup night. Laughter. Someone's music playing low. I walked up, carrying the dollhouse in both arms. And that's when Renee stepped out onto the porch, phone still in her hand, and the expression on her face wasn't welcome. It was something closer to arithmetic. She was calculating something, and I could see the exact moment she landed on an answer she didn't like. "Dad," she said, glancing back over her shoulder at the open door. "I thought we said tomorrow." "You said you needed help with chairs tonight," I said. "I figured I'd just stay over instead of driving twice." She stepped further onto the porch and pulled the door mostly closed behind her. The way you close a door in a room you don't want someone to see into. It's just Trevor's parents got in early, and some of his side of the family came down for the whole weekend. And honestly, Dad, the guest room is already full. It's kind of a whole thing tonight. Family only. I stood there with a dollhouse in my arms that had taken me 6 weekends to build, absorbing the particular phrase she'd chosen, family only, as though I required clarification on which category I fell into. "I'm her grandfather, Renee. I know. I know. And tomorrow's going to be great. I promise. Tonight is a lot, and I don't want you feeling like you have to entertain his parents on top of everything." She was already backing toward the door. "I'll call you tomorrow morning with the time, okay? Love you. Drive safe." The door closed. I stood on that porch for close to a minute, the June evening still warm, listening to laughter from a room I had apparently been quietly, politely uninvited from, 1 hour before I was supposed to be sleeping in it. I didn't argue. I didn't knock again. I set the dollhouse down on their porch swing, walked back to my truck, and drove the 40 minutes home with the radio off, the same instinct that used to tell me a beam was about to fail, now telling me something in my own family had been failing for a long time, and I simply hadn't run the numbers. I want to be honest with you about what I did that night, because I think it says something about who I am, and maybe about who you are too, if you're the kind of person still watching this. I didn't call her back. I didn't send an angry text. I made a pot of coffee at 11 o'clock at night, sat down at Carol's old desk in the study, and I opened my banking portal, and I began doing what I'd done for 31 years when something felt structurally wrong. I started auditing. The first thing I pulled was a clean transaction history of every transfer I'd made to Renee and Trevor's joint account over the previous 19 months. 61,400, confirmed, in black and white, dated and time-stamped. That number I already knew. What I hadn't done was cross-reference it against anything else, because I'd never had a reason to distrust my own daughter. I had a reason now. I called my accountant, a sharp woman named Priya Bhatt who'd handled my taxes since I retired, and I asked her a question I'd never asked in my life. I asked her how a person goes about requesting a full credit report and a mortgage history pull on people who are not you, when your name might be attached to their debts without your full knowledge. She asked me why. I told her about the preschool deposit, 11 months back, that Renee had said the bank declined to cover. Priya went quiet for a second and then said something that put a cold weight in my stomach. "Walter, did you ever co-sign anything for them? A HELOC, a personal loan, anything with your social security number on it?" I told her not that I was aware of. She told me to check anyway, immediately, because there was a way to find out for certain, and it wouldn't take her more than a day. It took her 1 day. What she found took me 3 more sleepless nights to fully absorb. 11 months earlier, around the same time, Renee told me the preschool deposit had bounced and she needed $4,000 in a hurry. A personal line of credit had been opened at a regional bank, $22,000, under Trevor's name, with a co-signer listed. The co-signer was me. I had never sat across from a loan officer. I had never signed a single document for that account. My signature was on it anyway, notarized, dated the same week I'd been at a cardiology follow-up appointment 2 states away visiting my brother, a fact I could prove because I still had the hotel receipt in a drawer from force of engineering habit. I document everything, always have. I sat in that study until 4 in the morning with the printed loan documents spread across the desk, running my thumb over a signature that was close enough to fool a bank teller, and nowhere close enough to fool a man who had signed 31 years of engineering approvals and knew his own hand the way he knew his own face in the mirror. My son-in-law had forged my name onto a $22,000 loan, and my daughter, I now had to consider, either knew or had chosen very hard not to ask. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep much for the following week either, but I want you to understand something about men like me. Grief doesn't always make you fall apart. Sometimes grief makes you extremely, dangerously calm, because falling apart is a luxury you decided you couldn't afford back when your wife was dying in a hospital bed, and somebody had to keep the lights on. I had that same stillness now. I put the coffee down. I picked up a legal pad instead, the same kind I'd used for 31 years of project reviews, and I began writing down every single transfer, every date, every excuse Renee had given me for needing it, in one column, and beside it, in a second column, what I could now independently verify about where that money had actually gone. The preschool deposit that had bounced Maya's preschool confirmed, when I called under the pretense of updating emergency contact information, that no payment on her account had ever failed. Not once in 2 years of enrollment. The property tax miscalculation, the county auditor's office, public record, showed their taxes had been paid on time, in full, every year they'd owned the house. The Q3 commission shortfall Trevor had supposedly hit 8 months back, the one that required $6,000 from me to cover their mortgage, I found, buried in a joint statement Renee had once forwarded me by mistake, and I'd simply never deleted, that the same month, they'd put a $4,000 deposit down on a lake house rental for the following summer. 8 requests, 8 stated reasons. 0 of them, once I actually checked, held up. I sat with that legal pad for the better part of a week, and here is the moment I think matters most in this story. The moment I'd ask you to really sit with if you've ever loved someone enough to stop asking questions you were entitled to ask. I wasn't angriest about the money. $61,000 is real money, and I'm not a wealthy man. I'm a retired engineer with a pension and a paid-off house, not a Rockefeller. But what actually broke something loose in my chest was simpler than the dollar figure. My daughter had looked me in the eye repeatedly across 19 months and constructed a fictional version of her own financial distress, specifically because she'd learned that the fictional version worked better on me than the truth would have. The truth was, they wanted a nicer basement, a lake house deposit, a cushion for Trevor's inconsistent commissions, and they'd learned that we might lose the house, open my checkbook faster than we'd like a summer rental ever would. And underneath all of it, quietly, was the forged signature. That wasn't carelessness. That was a decision made by 2 adults that my consent was an obstacle rather than a requirement. I want to tell you exactly what I did next, because it wasn't loud and it wasn't fast, and I think that's the part that surprises people most. I called the bank that held the $22,000 line of credit first, not Renee. I identified myself, explained that I had never authorized or signed any cosigner agreement, and requested their fraud department open a formal investigation into the notarization. The woman on the phone asked if I wanted to speak to a supervisor immediately or have one call me back within 24 hours. I told her I could wait 24 hours. I've waited longer for things that mattered less. Then I called Priya and asked her to help me draft something else entirely, not a confrontation, a document. A complete, itemized accounting of every transfer I'd made to Renee and Trevor over the previous 19 months, cross-referenced against the actual, verifiable circumstances at the time of each request, with the fraudulent loan flagged separately and marked pending investigation. Then, and only then, 3 days after I'd stood on that porch holding a dollhouse, I called my daughter. She picked up on the 4th ring, and her voice had that particular brightness people use when they suspect they're in trouble and are hoping enthusiasm will disguise it. Dad! Hi, sorry, it's been such a whirlwind week. Maya's party was so cute, I have pictures. I need you and Trevor to come to the house Saturday morning, I said. Both of you, not for coffee. I have some paperwork I need to go over. The brightness dimmed by about half. Paperwork? Dad, is everything okay? Is it your heart again? It's not my heart, I said. It's my signature. Saturday, 10 a.m. Bring Trevor. I hung up before she could redirect the conversation, which was, I've come to learn, one of her considerable talents. Saturday morning, they arrived at 9:58, which told me something too nervous, punctuality, not comfortable lateness. I let them in, offered coffee, which Trevor declined with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, and I sat them both down at my kitchen table, the same table where Carol used to do the crossword every Sunday morning, and I slid a manila folder across the surface between us. I want you to look through this before either of you says anything, I said. Take your time. Renee opened it first. I watched her face as she found, in order, the itemized list of 19 months of transfers, the cross-reference verification of each stated reason, the bank fraud investigation confirmation letter I'd received 2 days earlier, and last, the loan document with my forged signature, a copy of the hotel receipt from the same date proving I'd been 300 miles away, and a note from a handwriting analyst. Priya had connected me with a formality, but a devastating one. The silence at that table lasted almost a full minute. Trevor's jaw was working like he was chewing on something that wouldn't go down. "Dad, I can explain the loan," Renee finally said, and her voice had lost every bit of its brightness. "That was Trevor handled that. I didn't even know the specifics, I swear." "I want to believe that," I said, and I meant it, because some part of me still needed to believe my daughter hadn't watched her husband forge my name and simply looked away. "But I need you to understand what's already in motion, because it's not something I can undo even if I wanted to. The bank's fraud division has an open file. Notarized documents with forged signatures aren't a family disagreement, Renee. That's a federal matter the moment I reported it, and I did report it 3 days ago." Trevor's face went the color of old cement. "You reported it? Walter, you should have called me first. We could have." "Could have what?" I said, and I kept my voice level. The same tone I used to use in project review meetings when a contractor tried to explain away a load-bearing miscalculation. "Fixed it quietly? Trevor, you put my name on a document I never saw, for money I was already giving your family voluntarily." There was no version of this conversation where I found out and said nothing. Renee was crying by then. Not performing, I don't think. Genuinely crying, and some deep, ancient part of me that had rocked her to sleep as an infant wanted to reach across that table and tell her it was fine, we'd figure it out. "Dad's got you." I want to be honest that the impulse was there. I let it pass through me and out the other side, the way you let a wave pass over you at the shoreline without being pulled under by it. "The money," I continued, "the 61,000, I'm not asking for that back. I gave it freely. Under false pretenses I now understand, but freely, and I have to own my part in not asking harder questions sooner. That's mine to sit with. What I am doing, effective this morning, is this. I've instructed my bank to place a permanent flag on my accounts, requiring in-person verification for any transfer over $500 to anyone, including you. I've withdrawn as an emergency contact on Maya's preschool enrollment, not because I don't love her, but because apparently my name attached to anything in this family has become a resource to be used rather than a relationship to be respected. And I will be fully cooperating with the bank's fraud investigation into the loan, which means, Trevor, you should probably call an attorney today, not next week." "You do that to your own grandchild's father?" Renee said. And there it was, the reflex I'd been quietly bracing for since I sat down. Not an apology. A redirection, aimed at my guilt instead of at the truth on the table between us. "I'm not doing anything to Maya," I said. "Maya still has a grandfather who loves her more than his own life. What I'm not going to do anymore is pretend that forging my signature and lying to me about preschool tuition for over a year was a misunderstanding between family. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan, and I was the funding source." They left around 11:30. Renee didn't hug me on the way out, which was, I think, the most honest moment of the entire visit. The weeks that followed were not cinematic. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no single explosive confrontation that resolved everything. The fraud investigation moved the way these things move, slowly, through paperwork and depositions, and a notary whose license, I later learned, ended up under review. Trevor did hire an attorney. Whether charges are ultimately filed isn't something I control, and honestly, isn't the ending I was chasing in the first place. What I was chasing was simpler. I wanted my name back. I wanted the version of myself that spent 31 years catching structural failures before they collapsed buildings, to finally apply that same discipline to his own family, even though it hurt more than any project review ever had. Renee called me 6 weeks later. Not to apologize, not exactly, though there was an apology buried somewhere inside the call, underneath a lot of explaining and a fair amount of blaming Trevor for handling things badly. I listened. I didn't forgive everything in that phone call, because I've learned at 64 that forgiveness isn't a sentence you say, it's a process you live, and I'm still living mine. But I told her this, and I'll tell you the same thing. Whoever you are, wherever you're watching from tonight, I will always be Maya's grandfather. I will always love my daughter, because that particular kind of love doesn't have an off switch, no matter what she does with it. But I am done being a resource. I spent 31 years making sure other people's buildings didn't fall down around them without warning. I nearly let my own family collapse the exact same way, because I love them too much to check the foundation. I checked it. It's cracked. I'm not walking away from the people I love, but I am done pretending the crack isn't there. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to draw a line with someone you love more than your own comfort, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight and hit subscribe, because I have a feeling this isn't the last hard conversation my family and I are going to need to have, and I'd like you here for the next one too.